The year is 1941. A stranger walks into a village pub. His clothes are right, his accent flawless. He approaches the bar, offers a polite smile, and says, "A pint of beer, please." The bartender serves him, but as the man turns away, a silent signal passes between the publican and a constable in the corner. The stranger doesn't know it, but his journey may already be over. That one, simple, courteous request has flagged him as a potential enemy of the state. This wasn't an accident. It was a trap, hidden in plain sight, inside the most British of institutions. That trap, sprung by a simple phrase, was part of a much larger, invisible system. From 1940 encounters, German intelligence sent hundreds of agents into Britain, yet an astonishing number were caught, often within days, not by commandos or high-tech gadgets, but by pub landlords and village postmistresses. This is the story of how Britain's security service, MI5, weaponized the nation's unwritten rules. How could quiet, everyday habits become one of the most effective spy-catching nets in history? The answer was forged in the desperate summer of 1940, as invasion loomed. By the late summer of 1940, the war had reached Britain's doorstep. France had fallen. The evacuation from Dunkirk was a scar, not a victory. Now, across the Channel, the German military was assembling its forces for Operation Sea Lion, the planned invasion of the British Isles. But before the first landing craft could push off, Germany needed intelligence. The Abwehr, Admiral Careless's military intelligence service, was tasked with a critical mission: infiltrate Britain and prepare the ground. Their agents were trained to be ghosts. Their objectives were precise: map coastal defenses, locate airfields and radar stations, gauge public morale, and identify targets for sabotage. These were not amateurs. They were disciplined operatives, equipped with forged papers, radio transmitters, and a clear set of instructions for the final conquest of Europe. Facing this threat was Britain's security service, MI5, and MI5 had a terrifying problem. In 1940, it was a shockingly small organization, with only a few hundred officers to defend an entire nation. They couldn't be everywhere. They couldn't watch every harbor, every airfield, every quiet country lane where a parachutist might land. The professional spies of the Abwehr were poised to slip through a net that barely existed. Forced to innovate or fail, MI5 leadership made a radical decision. If they couldn't build a bigger net, they would turn the entire country into the net. The plan was to weaponize public awareness. Through posters, radio broadcasts, and cinema films, the government launched the Careless Talk Costs Lives campaign. Its message was simple and relentless. The enemy could be anywhere, listening. Strangers were not to be trusted. Any unusual behavior, no matter how small, was to be noted and reported. The campaign created a nationwide climate of intense, almost paranoid vigilance. The theory was that a foreign agent, no matter how well trained, would eventually make a mistake. Not in front of a trained officer, but in front of a bus conductor, a farmer, or a pub landlord. The strategy was set, but it was entirely untested. In the final months of 1940, the first wave of Abwehr agents began to fall from the night sky, their parachutes blossoming over the darkened fields of England. The system was about to face its first trial by fire. The theory was put to the test on May 14, 1941. His name was Karel Richter, a Czech national trained by the Abwehr. He parachuted into a field near London Colney, confident in his cover story and mission. But his first human contact was not a fellow operative. It was a local constable on patrol. The constable wasn't looking for a spy. He was just looking for anything out of place. And Richter was out of place. It wasn't one thing, but a series of small, discordant details. His suit, though well made, had a cut that was subtly foreign. The suitcase he carried was brand new, without a single scratch or scuff, an impossibility for any real traveler in wartime. Taken for questioning, the cracks in his fragile identity widened into fissures. He was unfamiliar with the food rationing system, a daily obsession for every Briton. He struggled with the basics of pounds, shillings, and pence. For MI5, Richter's swift capture was a revelation. It wasn't the single pub gaffe from the posters. It was a cascade failure. The Abwehr had built a perfect marionette, teaching him what to say and where to go. But they had forgotten to teach him how to live. They had given him a script, but not the unwritten knowledge of how to simply be in Britain. And in that failure, MI5 saw a systemic weakness they could exploit. The Richter case confirmed a revolutionary idea within MI5. It was championed by a small, dedicated team led by a man named Thomas Argyle Robertson, known simply as T.A. Robertson. He and his officers in Section B1A began to formalize a new doctrine of counterespionage, one based on a simple but profound insight. A nation's culture is a form of grammar, not the grammar of language, but of behavior, a social grammar of unspoken rules, rituals, and assumptions that every native learns implicitly from childhood. The Abwehr, in contrast, treated British culture like a vocabulary list, a set of facts to be memorized. Their agents knew the names of government ministers, but not the name of the local football team. They were taught the official exchange rate, but not the cost of a loaf of bread. Robertson's team realized that this gap between memorized knowledge and lived experience was the Abwehr's fatal weakness. This theory quickly generated a catalog of real-world tripwires. In a pub, a local wanting a beer would almost never ask for a pint of beer. The request was specific: a pint of bitter, a half of mild, or just the name of a local ale. The generic phrase was a classic tell of a foreigner trying to blend in. At the dinner table, a British person would hold their fork in their left hand and knife in their right, and rarely switch. The continental style of cutting food, then switching the fork to the right hand to eat, was a small, almost imperceptible gesture, but to a trained observer or a suspicious neighbor, it was another note of discord. Then there was the cue. The unspoken, almost sacred rules of lining up were a minefield. An agent, accustomed to a different culture, might inadvertently try to cut in line, or fail to recognize an informal cue at a bus stop, drawing quiet, disapproving glances that could escalate into a report. Even slang was a weapon. An agent might have been taught that 12 pence make a shilling, but on the street, no one called it a shilling. They called it a bob. Using the formal term was like speaking from a textbook, not from experience. From the German perspective, the rapid disappearance of their agents was a source of deepening paranoia and confusion. Post-war analysis of Abwehr records reveals a command structure completely blind to the real problem. Internal reports blamed everything except the truth. They suspected traitors within their own recruitment networks in occupied Europe. They blamed bad luck. They wildly overestimated the effectiveness of British radio direction finding, imagining a technological dragnet of impossible sophistication. Admiral Canaris and his staff, operating from a logical, process-driven military culture, simply could not comprehend that their meticulously trained operatives were being flagged by bartenders, bus conductors, and postmistresses. They were losing a war of whispers, defeated not by technology, but by a culture they had fundamentally misunderstood. The spies they sent vanished into a social fog they couldn't see, and their German handlers could never penetrate. MI5, however, was not leaving this to chance or amateur enthusiasm. The nationwide vigilance was the first line of defense, but it was just that, a line of detection, not of enforcement. Robertson's B1A worked to channel this public awareness into a professional system. They issued guidance to police forces, the Royal Mail, railway authorities, and other public-facing organizations. The instructions were precise. They didn't say, arrest anyone who orders the wrong drink. They said, if you notice a collection of small oddities, report it. A cultural mistake was not proof of espionage. It was the trigger for a quiet official process. A report would prompt a discreet visit from a local constable or a plainclothes officer. This officer's job wasn't to make an arrest, but to perform a check, to ask for identity papers and the all-important ration book. A spy's forged documents might look perfect, but they couldn't account for the subtle stamps, creases, and wear of a real, lived-in identity. This is where the real investigation began, turning a bartender's hunch into actionable intelligence. The system was brutally effective. Between 1940 and 1943, nearly every agent the Abwehr sent to Britain was identified and neutralized, most within days or even hours of arrival. The social grammar had become an almost perfect filter, but as the cells at MI5's interrogation center, Camp 020, began to fill, a new realization dawned on T.A. Robertson and his colleagues. Catching a spy was a success, but a captured spy was a wasted resource. A controlled spy, however, a spy who thought he was working for Berlin but was actually taking orders from London, that was a weapon of immense and unprecedented power. This profound shift in thinking led to the formation of one of the war's most audacious and secret bodies, the 20 Committee, so named because the Roman numerals for 20, XX, form a double cross. The committee's strategy was as simple as it was ruthless. A captured agent, facing overwhelming evidence and the certainty of a swift trial and execution, was presented with a stark choice: the gallows or survival. To survive, they had to become a double agent. They would continue to transmit intelligence to their German handlers, but from that moment on, their radio key would be tapping out messages scripted entirely by their new masters at MI5. Britain was no longer just intercepting the enemy's plans. It was about to start writing them. This system of controlled deception reached its apex in the spring of 1944. The mission? Operation Fortitude. To ensure the success of the coming D-Day landings, the Allies had to convince the German High Command that the massive invasion force aimed at Normandy was merely a diversion. The real attack, the Germans had to believe, would come later, at the Pas de Calais. The messengers for this epic lie were the double agents of the 1010 system. Chief among them was Juan Pujol Garcia, codenamed GARBO, an agent so trusted by the Germans they awarded him the Iron Cross. Through his radio, and those of other turned spies, a torrent of meticulously crafted, utterly false intelligence flowed to the Abwehr. It painted a vivid picture of a phantom army group under General Patton, massing in Kent, preparing to cross the Channel at its narrowest point. The deception was flawless. When Allied troops stormed the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, Hitler remained convinced it was a feint. He kept his most powerful panzer divisions waiting in the Pas de Calais, guarding against an army that didn't exist, while the real battle for Europe was being decided hundreds of miles away. And so we return to the man in the pub, and his simple request. "A pint of beer, please." We now understand the bartender's nod was not a call for an arrest. It was the first, quiet signal in a vast system of detection. It meant only one thing. This person is not one of us. He is worth a closer look. That single, cultural mistake was not a death sentence. For some, it was the start of a journey that led not to the gallows, but to an interview for the most dangerous job in the world, a double agent. The unwritten rule of the pub became the first link in a chain of counterintelligence that stretched from a village bar through the XX Committee and into the very heart of the German High Command, a chain that helped clear the path for the Normandy landings. In the War of Shadows, the most decisive battles weren't always fought on the battlefield. They were sometimes won quietly, over a single pint, in the corner of a local pub.